What's up, guys? We are episode 7 of the Powerlifters, Deadlifts podcast, and we have one of our sponsored athletes with us today, powerlifter Kelli Thomson. You want to give us a little background, a little how you got started in fitness? And
So, if I'm backtracking, powerlifting now. I did bodybuilding prior to that, and then I actually did pageants before bodybuilding. And I've been in
pageants, like
beauty pageants.
Like beauty pageants?
Mm-hmm.
Like you stood up on stage and were like, look at me?
Yep.
Yeah,
Much.
okay.
So I hired a trainer to get me, in pageant shape for the swimwear division. And then she kind of was like, hey, have you ever thought of bodybuilding? And then kind of went from there.
Did you compete in bodybuilding?
Hmm?
Like you stepped on stage?
Yep.
Oh.
I did 5 shows. I did the figure division. Too much muscle for bikini.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So, yeah.
I actually didn't know that. I didn't know you actually competed. I knew you trained that way.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
Yeah.
So what
Was it? I did the Lehigh, the Philly, Delaware twice. I think I did the Lehigh twice, actually.
Those are pretty. I mean, the Lehigh's a big show. I think it's the biggest one in Pennsylvania
Mm-hmm.
for like amateur shows.
Yeah.
So what happened where you reach a point in bodybuilding where you're like, and then you kind of transitioned into powerlifting?
It was kind of, I guess, the motivation portion or dieting for one. I've never been really good at dieting. I like to enjoy my food and not, be upset every time I'm eating because I can't have something. And then there was a point where I was doing 3+ hours of cardio, minimal carbs, all protein, and just my weight wasn't moving. So then I got blood work done and found out I had thyroid disease. So that kind of did it for me. I took a year off from, strict dieting, just eating not however I wanted to, but kind of healthier eating, if you will, just to kind of get myself back to normal. And then as I was doing that, I started training how I wanted to train, which was seeing how heavy I could lift things. And then a bunch of people kind of approached me and were just like, hey, do you power lift? And I was like, no. And they were like, oh, well, you probably should. And I was like, okay. So then I did my first meet, and I was like, ooh, I like this. I'm kind of good at it, so I'm going to stick with it.
I feel like that's how most people get involved in powerlifting.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 20, I was doing dips with I had 2 or 3 plates on the chain,
Yeah.
and this older guy came up to me in the local YMCA, and he's like, "You're actually kind of strong." He's like, "You should powerlift," and I was like, "No, I don't want to compete." And we started talking. He knew I was going to Penn State. He's like, they have a huge team for powerlifting. He goes, just go sign up and see what happens. And that's what led to me powerlifting.
Yeah.
But I had no interest in it, and I think mostly because there's nothing in magazines about powerlifting.
No.
When you get a fitness magazine, it's how you look. It's not really about the performance.
It's all about aesthetics.
Yeah. So I think every time I think about you, I think about 4 or 5 for 10. That was your, you squatted 405 pounds for 10 reps. It's just insane to even think about. I mean, my best isn't much higher than that. And so it's super humbling to see. And I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of people get butthurt even just seeing that. But it's just incredibly impressive. But that's not really powerlifting. I think when you think about that rep scheme, that's something like a really heavy set that a bodybuilder would do.
Yeah.
So would you say that can you describe your training a little bit?
So when it comes to my training, depending on how far out from a meet I am, it incorporates a lot of bodybuilding. Anything that's typically 10 reps or more, you kind of consider it bodybuilding, right? But that specific day, I wanted to say it was a 3x4, and then my last set just kind of Amrep it, as many as possible, and I don't know where 10 came from, because as soon as I was done, like Sean, who does my programming, was like, where did that come from? And I was like, I have no idea. I just kept going till I felt like I was going to fail. Like yesterday or last night, we went to the gym and I had bench. I did 205 for 11. Like, I don't think I've ever done that before. I'm going to say 11 and a half because I failed 12 at lockout. But that came out of nowhere. I mean, I'm feeling it today, like in my armpits and chest. But anytime he gives me Amrep or like a top set, but like not for a single top set of however many top whatever Amrep, it's almost like from doing bodybuilding for so long, that part of me comes out and kind of pushes it. Like my muscular endurance kind of comes out of nowhere. And it's like, hey, you did 15 to 20 reps for all of this stuff when you did bodybuilding, so it's nothing new. And a lot of my accessories, it's always higher rep, never really super heavy. Like if I'm doing bicep curls, it's not like I'm ever going to do 4 of them with 50 pounds or something like that.
So when you AMRAP, which for those of you guys listening means as many reps as possible, when you do that, do you even count the reps, or do you just go and then have like, you know, Sean's, you know, who's spotting you or whatever, count the reps for you?
I have like a number in my head that I'm like, okay, I want to hit this, but usually anything over like 5, I kind of just lose count because I'm more so focusing on, you know, my form, actually lifting the weight, and then most of the time I'm recording it so I can kind of look back on it to see where I can fix things. Then I'll start counting and I'm like, oh, I got that many. And usually it's kind of like, even when I'm on the platform, it's almost like when I'm lifting something, I black out, but not like I'm going to pass out, black out. Like I just don't remember everything in that moment. So, yeah, counting it, I'm just like, all right, if I'm going to hit 8, I'm going to hit 8. And then if I have more gas in the tank, I just keep going.
Yeah, so your adrenaline's kind of like overtaking, and you're just into it. You're into like the performance aspect of just pushing your body, and you know that if you're thinking about counting, you may not be performing at your best.
Right. Like if I have in my head, okay, we're gonna do as many as possible, and I want to get to 15. I'll hit 15, and like I probably still have some left in the tank, but since I was so focused on a specific number, I might not be giving it my all at that point.
Okay.
So I'm just kind of like, all right, my working set was, let's say 5, get to 5, keep going.
When you're training, like, do you think about like lift execution, or do you have that down so well at this point that you don't have to think about that to take away from the training?
I would definitely say I do think about it, and it depends. If I have like a nagging injury, that's definitely in the front of my brain, like executing it properly so I'm not furthering an injury, or if something just doesn't feel right, I'm not executing it right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I've always said that like bodybuilding is physical and powerlifting is mental. So I always feel like if your mind's not 100%, you're just not going to be that strong. Yeah. So if you have a nagging injury and it's pulling you back, or it's something, you know, maybe you didn't warm up properly, and your hip and your low back, so when you're squatting, you know, things are rounding a little bit, you're going to pull back from, you know, that AMRAP set because things aren't functioning 100%. So then your training's not going to be executed as well. So I've always said that, and I think everything that you're saying kind of follows that.
Yeah, it's definitely mental, because if there's a day where I don't feel, if I'm just like, I don't feel like lifting today, it shows in my training. Like, it's not, and not every day is going to be perfect, but if I, you know, have something on my mind that's not even lifting related, it keeps popping up in my head while I'm training, and I'm not fully mentally into my training, and it shows for sure.
And that's also like a big difference between bodybuilding and powerlifting. Is I feel like in bodybuilding, you're having a bad day, you still have to show up, right? You still have to tax the muscle, you still have to, you know, stay with your disciplined diet. But with powerlifting, like if you're not 100%, I've always said don't show up. And obviously there you can make arguments where it's still worthwhile to show up, but if you have if you're in prep for something and you need an extra day off, like, you have to take it. Whereas bodybuilding, like, you still have to show up. You might just back off a little bit.
I agree with that 100%, because if there is a day where I feel really sore and I just don't feel like, I will take that extra day off.
Yeah.
Because it's not like my strength is going to decrease over an extra day of rest.
Probably go up.
Right. Like, I probably need that. So I agree with that 100%.
What was your best squat, bench, and deadlift?
In comp or in gym?
Oh, comp. You know how it is.
My best squat in comp, kilos. It's like 460 something.
In pounds?
In kilos. Or 460 point something. They use kilo plates.
Yeah, but it's 460 pounds.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
What?
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
Like
What's up, Ray Williams?
My best bench is 275, and my best deadlift is 501. And that's all in comp.
And it's just humbling. My best deadlift is not much higher than that.
That kind of came out of nowhere. Like, I was struggling with my deadlift for a while. I went back and forth between sumo and conventional, and it just, for some reason, something wasn't clicking. And then it was almost like 2 weeks out from the competition, it just started working. And then, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the video. It moves so fast. I was not prepared for that. I almost threw up before I did that. Like, my nerves were so worked up, and the music I was listening to was making it worse. I literally had to put on, like, slow jams to calm myself down. I felt so, like you said before, the adrenaline, it just, like, it was, I don't know. It's at an all-time high during competitions, and my nerves are, like, out of this world. It's not exactly a good feeling.
Yeah, I think everybody kind of goes through that when they're on the platform, though. I don't know anybody that stays, like, even if they look cool, calm, and collected, typically they're super anxious. And I think that anxious feeling is part of what fuels everybody.
Yeah.
And I've always done so much better on the platform than I do in training. Like, I can do a full out 100% max on squat, and then, a month later go to the meet and do 20, 30 pounds more.
Yeah.
And it's just because of that nervous feeling. And I think the equipment helps a little bit too.
Yeah, for sure.
Having the Eleco bars and all that stuff. So can you go through kind of like what your training protocol is? Like, just normal training, maybe not prep?
Normal training, so normally I train 4 to 5 days a week, and I'll isolate muscle groups. And I also it's built around the 3 main lifts because I am a power lifter. So there's a day where I'll squat, and then it'll be a lot of pushing movements with my legs.
Okay.
When I'm deadlifting, it'll be, deadlift and then pulling movements, pull downs, RDLs, something. Benching, it's typically, I bench, and then it's more so arms. And then I'll have a day where I kind of focus on my core. So it'll be not just straight sit-ups, leg lifts. It's more so ab exercises that are, bigger exercises, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But core stability.
So you train a movement and then a muscle group?
Yes.
Okay. And I think that's the typical, like, hybrid training of today. Is it all seems to be kind of built along the same concept. When I first started powerlifting, raw lifting really wasn't a thing, right? So everybody lifted in gear. For collegiate, we didn't even have the option to lift raw. Like, it wasn't a class. Like, you lifted in single ply, or if you wanted to lift raw, you would just get absolutely destroyed in the single ply class. Like, that was your options. So obviously lifting in gear made us migrate a little bit more towards, like, conjugate training. Is there a reason why that you've never been kind of steered in that direction?
My training, the flow of my training typically goes with what's working for me. If it's the style of, if it was like a conjugate style training, if it was working for me and I was, the weights were going up, wasn't getting hurt, then I would kind of stick with that. I just get my program and just show up and do it. I don't really ask too many questions.
I think that there's I think that there's a blessing in being put on autopilot, right? Because if you don't know why you program something, you also can't tell yourself that you don't need to do it, or do it to a certain extent. So I think that there's a huge benefit in strength programming when you're just following a template.
Yeah.
And that's, you haven't done any of your own programming recently?
No, Sean does all of my programming, and I don't get my week's workouts all at once. I literally get the day of my workout, what I'm supposed to do. Because if I see what I'm going to do in the future, I might,
Talk yourself out of it.
Right. Or I might say, we're going to push that back a little bit.
Well, it could scare you too. If a number's much bigger than you think you're capable of, but your coach thinks you are, you might start backing off your training because it beats you up.
Yeah, I get a day of, and then the closer to like my workout time slot I get that workout, the better. Because if I see what I'm supposed to do in the morning and I'm not training till the evening, and say it's like, we're going for maxes at this point, and I see like a number I've never touched before, and that's in my head all day, like, oh crap, I have to hit that number like later tonight, and then I start to psych myself out a little bit. But yeah, I'm definitely an autopilot lifter.
I've always done all my own programming, and when I know I'm having like a test day or a heavy top set, I start getting like super OCD. Like I need to make sure my meals are on point. I need to make sure like I'm getting enough calories.
Yeah.
I need to make sure that I get a good night's rest the night before. Like I try to make sure everything's in a line. But that's probably not the healthiest thing to do too. Like sometimes.
How often do things fall into place when you're doing that?
You have to move everything else out of the way.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem. It worked in college when you're young. When you're older and you have responsibilities and stuff,
right.
You can't just shift your entire life around, a squat night.
Yeah, can't exactly move adulting around squat, bench, and deadlifting.
So you work, like your full-time job is a trainer, and you're a powerlifter, ex-bodybuilder. You've been doing this for 10 years, I think collectively, right? At least. What's one of the biggest issues that you run into when you're training people, the general public?
Body awareness. So and it's funny because my actual book of clients, it's not just one demographic. They're all over the place. I have older demographic, I have people with injuries, I have younger people, I have athletes. So obviously nobody gets trained the same.
Yeah.
But everybody has this, and I don't know if it's something, if you do it for a while, you get better at it, but being self-aware of your own body is something I run into all the time with my clients, no matter who they are. Granted, older demographic, it's much more noticeable, but...
When you say self-aware, like in what sense?
Like if I'm asking you to, we'll take engaging your core. A lot of people don't know how to do that. And to me, it's simple. But like to somebody who hasn't been working out for a long period of time, it's really hard. Like I tried to tell, like, okay, when I'm teaching someone how to squat, how to brace, how to engage their core, they don't know how to do that. Or it could be something as simple as like I'm telling them to step with their right foot and they're using their left. They just don't have the awareness like of how to engage those things, or the mind to muscle connection's just not there. So it's very repetitive. We have to do the same thing over and over again, and I have to sometimes figure out different ways to do it depending on what type of learner they are. Visual, hands-on, or they need to like hear me say it over and over again. A lot of people are visual learners, so if they see me do it, they try to mimic exactly what I'm doing. But if they haven't been working out or are familiar with it, it's almost like, I'll do something as simple as like sitting down on a chair, and they do it all types of different.
That's fair. I think everybody's body is different and different leverages. I think it becomes very difficult to try to mimic people. And I think that that's where the internet versus like personal in-person training is a huge difference. If you see your favorite bodybuilder or whatever performing a movement, a good example actually I think is Julian Smith. Do you know who that is?
I think I've heard the name.
So he's like big in the natural bodybuilding community.
Okay.
He does some wild movements. My body's way too tight. If I did the movements that he did, I would probably tear something. And I've been, training for 12 plus years at this point, and I couldn't imagine somebody trying to do that with 6 months of training. Right? So if I can't do it at this stage, and then they're trying to mimic, their favorite guy on Instagram at 6 months, like something bad is going to happen.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where you need a little bit of guidance there on what to do and how far to take it.
Yeah, I feel like that's a huge deal when it comes to online coaching or online programming, whichever. But and my job offers virtual training. I don't do that because I'd rather have somebody in front of me and I can correct them right then and there when something's going wrong. If they're just taking, whatever I text them or email them, and then they're like, hey, I did my workout. Okay, how'd it feel? Yeah, I hurt my back. If I didn't see it, I can't fix it.
Right.
So I'm a huge fan of being like able to stare at you while you're doing something. So if you're currently, leaning one way or something like that, I can fix it right then and there.
I think one of the biggest differences between somebody that's just starting out and somebody at your experience level is just knowing how hard to push, right? A lot of people are scared to go that far, and maybe they can't push themselves that hard. But in order to get where you're at, it's going to take 5-10 years of constantly pushing yourself just a little bit harder each time. I don't see too many people doing that without a little bit of guidance, right? So if you're,
it's internal.
Yeah.
If they can't like get over that internal battle of pushing themselves, like they're scared of getting hurt, or they just don't know the right weight to push themselves at. Like if they had an extra 10 pounds in themselves on whatever they're lifting, if they don't, like you said, the guidance, you need that guidance of somebody to watch you who is experienced and knows, like, hey, you have this, and like it's
an accountability measure,
yeah,
for sure. So recently, I think you hurt your back, right?
It's like on and off, but yeah.
On and off. Have you had like an MRI or anything?
I haven't had an MRI, so my hips, my hip joints, my SI joints are very mobile. Not to the point where I can do like a full-blown split, but when I have in my legs, when I'm squatting, one side is more dominant than the other. So because those joints are a little bit more mobile and can move a bit, they kind of come
loose, unhinged, maybe.
Unhinged, yeah, we could say that. So I have to get adjusted and do my own, not therapy, but be proactive about it, do stretches, do mobility work to kind of help it. Because when it's, like, especially on my left side, that's the side that typically hurts. When that's off or inflamed or whatever, it's almost like I can't walk. It's that much pain. And I like to think I have a pretty high pain tolerance. I have tattoos, piercings, and everything. But it's just not being able to do activities of daily living because your back is in pain. It sucks. But it's something that I have to work around. Doing unilateral movements definitely helps. Working on core work helps a lot. I don't think I was doing enough of that. That's why I was getting injured so frequently. It was almost like every other week I would have some type of pain in my back. But I've been a little bit more proactive about it as of lately. because I don't like being hurt all the time.
Have you ever done ROMWOD?
No.
So it's a range of motion workout of the day, I think is what it stands for. And I did it for the first time at a CrossFit gym. I was just dropping in to a gym that a friend of ours owned, and just checking out the workouts and stuff. And that's what they were doing that day. And I was like, oh, this is interesting, because it's not usually what I'm used to.
Right.
And I feel like it's like a yoga stretching. But it can be anywhere from like 10 minutes to maybe 35 minutes, and they have all these programs on there. I hate to say it, but I've had in 2014 I herniated 2 discs and bulged the next one. So it was so bad that I used to have somebody pull me out of my car.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and it wasn't fun. But after a long time, no surgeries, no injections, I didn't want to do any of that stuff. ROMWOD was in theory, some of the movements that they do were what kind of helped me relieve a lot of that pain. So now when I feel things starting to tighten up, I download ROMWOD, I sign up again, and I start doing the workouts. Then all of a sudden, like my hip, my back, everything's just like freed up, and it feels wonderful. And I think if anybody's suffering from back pain or hip issues or even knee issues that are caused by tight hamstrings and quads, I think it's something that almost everybody should do.
Yeah.
It's weird, like we talked about it on a previous podcast. For some reason, like the bodybuilding industry or powerlifting industry, like it seems like anti-flexible.
Yeah.
Right? Like everybody's just so stiff and they can't move properly. But what's funny is like they would probably be bigger if they could activate the muscles properly, and they would probably be healthier, which means they would be stronger if they were in the right positioning.
Yep.
And I don't think people really focus on that stuff too much. And you were talking about your mobility. The first thing I noticed when you squat and when you lift, but your lift execution is almost perfect, right? So between, if you're benching with your shoulder retraction and your arch, or when you're squatting, your back only stays in a line. Unless, of course, I'm sure that there's some squats where you hurt yourself, and that was probably because that didn't stay there. But I feel like if you focus on that stuff to start, then you can kind of push yourself without having to think about those things, in the future. And, we were talking about strength being mental. I think that, not having to worry about being out of position and activating the right muscles and all that stuff is just probably one of the fastest roads to success in powerlifting and bodybuilding.
Yeah,
So.
for sure. I mean, there's a lot of steps before doing a lift. And my warm-ups before I even start touching weights is so long. Like, my workout takes like 2 hours, but the actual working out portion is probably like an hour.
It's funny. Before we opened Coalition, we opened in 2014. Ben started working for us in 2015. But Ben and I knew each other from the gym. So we went to the same very small hole-in-the-wall gym, and I didn't know him. I just referred to him as like the guy with the tree tattoo, because that's what he has, and he referred to me as the guy who would warm up for a half hour and then squat for an hour. And but that's just that was pre-injury actually, but that was just what it took.
Yeah.
And it's such an important part of the daily lifting routine. I think people are better off with a half-hour warm-up and a half-hour squatting than an hour of leg training.
Yeah. I mean, you have to make sure everything's moving and feeling good before you actually start to push weight. In my opinion, at least.
Yeah, and that's like an athletic approach, right? So if you treat it like a sport, you spend time, you open up your body, you make sure that you can perform the movements correctly. You're not going to go out on a pitching mound if your shoulder's not rotating correctly.
Right.
So why would you put 500 pounds on a bar if you can't squat down properly?
I see, and like these aren't my clients, and it's just like the gym,
the bros.
I mean, yeah, I guess you could call them bros, but like the gym goers in the gyms that I work at. But I can't tell you how many times I see them come in and I know they didn't warm up, or they'll walk on the treadmill for 5 minutes, and I'm like, I understand you're getting blood flowing, but that's not
You're still
warming
stiff.
you up, right? And then they'll just go over to either a bench or a squat rack or even the dumbbells and just start like piling on the weight or like lifting the heaviest dumbbell. And as I'm training my client, I see trainers see everything. So I'm like, watching out on my peripherals, and I'm like I'm just waiting for them to get hurt, or I'm gonna have to save them. If I'm the only one around and they're failing something, like God forbid somebody's failing a squat, and I see them struggling and they don't have the safeties up.
Right.
Like if they warmed up properly, they probably wouldn't be in that predicament. Like, obviously they're moving the weight, but they just do gym bro things. They just want to throw stuff around and be, that gym guy, the strongest guy in the gym.
Is there, with everything now, going through injuries and two different, or I guess 3 different sports in the fitness industry, like, is there anything that is so concrete to you that it's just essential to whether it's bodybuilding or powerlifting?
Warming up.
You don't think like there's a lift or a movement or a rep scheme or a theory?
Technique over weight. For powerlifting, definitely making sure your technique is on point. Because if your technique's not on point, the weights aren't going to go up.
They'll go up fast until a certain point.
Until you hurt something.
Yeah, and then so I see it on deadlift.
Those newbie gains.
Yeah, but I see it on deadlift all the time. Like when people start deadlifting and they deadlift with the arch, really rounded back.
Right, where
they
look
can,
like a cat.
Yeah, they can rip the weight off the floor fine. But like, good luck going up from there because your back's so out of position. You're never gonna lock out anything heavier than that.
Yeah, they can't get their hips through, and they just kind of like stop hunched over, and they're like, "Oh, I just lifted 600 pounds." I'm like, "No, you didn't."
But they'll be at 600 for 6 years, right? And it just ends up, in a vicious cycle. But I think what I was getting at is, like for me personally, if I have somebody prepping for a meet, I make them do back extensions. I'm so big on them for strengthening the lower back, especially banded back extensions. They're absolutely my hands down my all-time favorite movement, and I think they're 100% essential. I call it bulletproofing. They do it 2 to 3 times a week, and they're gonna do it on back and leg days.
I have them a lot in my programming.
Yeah, but to me, like that's an essential thing. Is there anything in your experience that you just find to be absolutely essential for training?
I mean, those are definitely a staple for sure. Pull-ups, they're almost always, if I don't do pull-ups, I feel like I don't deadlift as well. It just sounds weird to me.
Do you find that the lat pull down is an acceptable replacement for pull-ups?
If it's done with good form, sure. But if you're leaning all the way back and just pulling it to your chest, that's not mimicking a pull-up.
Just real quick, if you look into our gym, we have 6 different ways to do pull-ups. We don't have a single way to do a lat pull down. So we're on the same page as you.
Okay. I'm like, if you can't do an assisted one, most gyms have an assisted pull-up machine. If you can't do that, something's wrong. Like you have a whole weight stack that can lift your whole body in the correct positioning, but I mean that's just me personally. If 1 week I can do 10 pull-ups and then the following week I can only do 3, like something's off, and I notice it in my locking out of my deadlifting. RDLs I think are a pretty big staple. Trying to think what else.
I mean, it doesn't even have to be a movement. It could be, eating something before you lift, or maybe not eating something before you lift, or sleep, or anything along those lines.
Sleep's a huge deal. I try to get as much sleep as possible. As you already know, I have trouble sleeping, so.
And that's what most of your supplements revolve around.
And that's just because I have insomnia. Like, I've had my doctor tell me, you have insomnia. So I've tried to, aside from using, medications, I've tried to limit my caffeine intake or the time of day. drinking enough water, going to bed and not touching my phone. Trying to do all of those things on top of using, the ZMA and Dream Chaser, which is like a really good combo for me. I honestly don't eat a lot before training, if at all. And that, I don't think that's on purpose. That's more so my schedule throughout the day. So, like, I'll eat something on my way into work, but I might not lift until 2, 3 in the afternoon. I won't have anything in my system. And sometimes those are my best lifting days. Now, I'm not saying you should do that, but, like, that's what works for me. I like to tell my clients, because I've had some of them, get lightheaded, feel like they're nauseous, but that's because they haven't ate at all. So I'm like, okay, eat something small 1 to 2 hours before you see me, and you should be fine. But for me, if I have like a coffee or an energy drink, I'm typically fine.
Does Instagram and like social media, does it influence your, I guess, like desire to participate in the sport?
No.
So if that wasn't around, you would still be doing what you're doing?
Absolutely.
What about like the potential? When I was training serious powerlifting, 500 pounds raw squat was like, it was kind of a big deal to hit that milestone.
Still is.
It is, but now you see, a ton of people like, same weight class, the 198, 181 to 220s, just incredibly strong people. And I think it gives us access to seeing what the body can do.
Yeah.
Right. So
sure.
if I see another guy, squatting 600 pounds at 200 body weight, I'm like, nah, I can do that. It's just going to take me some time, but I can do that. Does it motivate you in that sense?
It does, especially when I'm seeing, other women in my weight class and what they can lift. If I know them personally, I'm just like, okay, what are you doing? How are you doing that? What are you eating? What are you supplementing? Are you on anything? Stuff like that. I'll ask questions. I don't care.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I definitely think social media helps in a sense of knowing the potential that it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
How it's done, that's going to be different person to person. But that's how I use social media. I try not to see, my competition and get, butthurt about
Discouraged. Yeah.
I see it as like, okay, all right, that's what I have to work towards, because, that's the name of the game. It is a sport. Everybody wants to win. And the way you win is by being the strongest person. So I see it as a motivator, not so much as a, gets me in my head and gets discouraged. Yeah.
When do you plan on competing again?
I'm actually doing the Showdown meet in New York in September.
It's a big meet.
Yeah, I'm nervous. I am so nervous.
Everybody who's anybody's going to that.
Yeah. Oh, man. I was super honored when I got the invite to it, and then I saw, who I was competing against. Like, I saw the roster, and I was like, oh, shit. I was like, dang, what am I going to do? But, that's the whole point of, like, running a training cycle. You peak at the right time, and things just kind of go well. Honestly, I have no expectations. I just want to show up and do the meet and not bomb out, obviously. But
that's a good plan.
There's numbers I have in my head that I would like to hit, but I'm so early in my training cycle. I'm kind of like basing it off of like my previous training cycle.
Have you started what essentially you would call prep for that show or for that meet?
That started this week, actually. So a lot of stuff is more focused around the big 3 lifts. The accessory or auxiliary work is in my weak areas in those 3 lifts.
Okay, so that's really the only 2 things that have changed?
Yeah. It's not so much like before I would have, we'll take bench for example. I would bench, but I would do 6 or 7 accessory exercises and not focus on benching.
Okay. So now you're giving yourself more time for just the movement and then smaller time for the accessory stuff.
Yeah.
That makes sense. What are you doing with as far as like diet and sleep now that you're in prep mode? And before you answer, I always feel like assuming you're in like a 16-week prep. I don't know how many
I
weeks.
think I'm at 14 weeks
14
right
weeks.
now, but typically 16 to 14, yeah.
I feel like the first half of prep is like you're actually making strength progress, and then the second half you're actually just getting better at lift execution.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So this is like it's an important phase for you. So what are you doing with your diet and your sleep?
So sleep's been that's probably gonna change with work starting. Fingers crossed work goes back to normal, but I'm gonna be so busy at work because I'm gonna be jumping between 3 different clubs.
Right.
But luckily, once things open, the hours changed, so I will be home at a reasonable time. So hopefully my sleep doesn't take a hit. The dieting portion. So before, I remember telling you I was doing keto or similar to keto, very low carb, high fats. That really worked for me. I mean, right now I'm only, I want to say maybe 5 to 8 off of my weight class.
Okay.
Give or take. And granted, that's from not really tracking or anything like that. But I have to dial in my nutrition. That way I don't I don't want to do a water cut if I don't have to do a water cut.
Right.
Granted, it's easy to do if I'm just doing water and not having to sit
Especially
in a
5
sauna.
pounds. 5 pounds is easy.
Right.
Like that'll happen overnight.
Exactly. But if I can walk into weigh-ins at my weight,
drinking a Gatorade and a bottle of water.
I would prefer to do that. But before, when I was doing minimal carbs, higher fats, higher protein, I was sitting like right around at my weight class. And that was, at the time, I had 2 meets lined up, but then, quarantine happened, so they all got pushed back. And that just really worked for me. I like higher fatty foods more than anything, and I feel more energy out of them, and I feel fuller longer. So that's pretty much why that worked for me. And hey, whatever works for you, you continue to do. So that's kind of what I was doing, and that's probably what I'll get back into. I mean, as of the past few weeks, I've kind of just been eating whatever I want.
You and everybody else.
Yeah.
Quarantine.
So I'm not exactly, I don't know if I'm ready to do that, but it's not like I was starving myself or taking away from what I would have wanted anyway. It's not going to be a huge change.
I think your activity level will go up, and I think you'll lose 5 pounds just from that.
Yeah.
Right? From training and being on your feet and additional steps and going club to club, less being at home. I think naturally, just with me, anytime I have increased movement, my weight just drops right off.
Yeah, for sure. I could definitely see that happening.
All right, so do you talk goal numbers for the meet?
I mean,
or do you try not to get in your head about it?
I try not to get in my head. I mean, it's still a goal no matter when I say it or when I hit it. I'd like to bench 300. I've done that with a slingshot with ease. Granted, slingshot adds like 40, 50 pounds, give or take.
Yeah, it depends on the person, yeah.
So I know what it feels like in my hands. Deadlift, I don't exactly have a number I want to hit because 500 moved so easy. I probably had 200, 20 pounds, 30 pounds in me
then
at that meet.
Yeah.
So if my prep and peaking goes as it should, I mean 500 plus. 525 seems like a good number. I mean, 25 pounds, you hold 25 pounds in your hand, you're like, oh, that's not much. But when you're adding that to 500, it's like, okay, wait. But do I think I have it in me? Yes. Squat, that's been my most problematic lift.
Problematic I don't think many people are going to say a 500-pound squat for a female is a problematic lift.
I haven't even hit 500 yet, but that's my goal.
Okay. What'd you hit, 490?
I hit 485.
Okay.
And that moved really well. I want to say I went for like 465 or something, and then I just wasn't coming out of the hole in position, and my chest started falling, and then that kind of strained my lower back. So
Got bulletproof.
Yeah. Well, that was the first initial injury, and now that's like, no matter how much I try to put it out of my head, it's still there. Like, you got hurt doing this lift. So, yeah, I mean, 5. I guess it's more so my total. Like, I'd like to hit, what is that, 1,300? That'd be cool.
Cool. And when's the meet? September?
The end of September. I want to say it's the 20-something. I should know this, but I don't.
Cool. All right, guys. If you want to see Kelli squat 500, bench in the 300s, and deadlift well into the 500s, follow her on Instagram. What's your handle?
MSZKELLI.
Yeah, follow her on Instagram. She's a really good follow. She has some incredible lifts. You'll scroll through and see that 405 for 10. Obviously, she's a coalition athlete, so give her some support, and her meet is in September.